2, 1.
Hi everybody, my name is Hugh Tant. I'm a United States Army retired Brigadier General, and I'm going to talk to you about my story for your 75th ASMC convention and celebration. And my story is about the Iraqi currency exchange that happened between the 15th of October 2003 to the 15th of October 2004. That was the actual dates of the exchange. But I've made a little slide presentation here to help me keep on track. I'm going to talk to you about 20 minutes, and my beautiful wife, who is filming this, she would tell you quickly that I've never done anything well for 20 minutes, if you get my idea. Anyway, so today, the backdrop being right after the invasion of Iraq in March of 2003, that was a success, a total success, but the country was in total disarray. You had the former regime loyalists, and you had terrorists over there who were trying to disrupt everything that the Iraqi people needed to do to get well. And the economy was in a total ruins. And so they had to call up somebody from the American Society of Military Comptrollers, and they got a hold of me through General Roger Scearce. They had contacted him saying, who's the best person for this job? And well, Roger never liked me too much, and so he said, Hugh Tant will do it. No, Roger and I are best friends, actually. And so I was glad to step up and do it, and my wife was glad to get rid of me out of the house for a while. Okay, so the currency was in total disarray, and the country's economy was in total disarray. The banking system was in total disarray. I mean, it was back in the 1920s type banking. They didn't have any checking accounts. The largest loan we could find over there was $3,000. And I mean, it was a mess. There was no way to have international payments. If you wanted to construct a building with engineers from Germany, let's say, you'd have to take a big sack of money on an airplane and give it to the corporation that was going to do the work. I mean, that's ridiculous. You know, you couldn't have any progress payments or anything. I mean, there's no internal controls to speak of, and it was just a mess. So President Bush at that time, he talked to Ambassador Berman. He says, you need to have a new currency. And you see, the backdrop on that is when Saddam Hussein became the dictator over there, the Iraqi dinar was worth $3 for every Iraqi dinar. $3 US for every Iraqi dinar. And then after he took over and did massive amounts of printing of the currency, the inflation occurred, and the devaluation of the Iraqi dinar went down to like 2,400 dinar for $1. It was totally upside down. So all that had to be corrected, and to get into a reasonable exchange rate, and to get the currency exchanged on the international market again. So you had the Saddam dinar currency, which was being used throughout about 2/3 of the country. And then they only had two denominations. One denomination was worth about 12.5 cents, and the other denomination was worth $5. You can just imagine what kind of a complication that was for shopkeepers and people who were wanting to buy goods and services, and it was just a mess. And then there was a currency in the north, the Kurdish currency called the Swiss dinar, and it was worth more, but it hadn't been reissued, and it was, so the paper was falling apart, and but it was worth a lot more. So just to jump to the exchange, when we started exchanging the old currency for the new currency, the Saddam currency exchanged at 1-to-1, the rate. They'd get a new dinar for an old dinar, a Saddam dinar, or a print dinar. Print dinar is another word for Saddam dinar. And the Kurdish Swiss dinar, they got 150 new dinar for an old Swiss dinar because it was worth a lot more. All right, so what we needed was one currency for this one nation. You don't want two currencies, you want one currency. And it needed to be stable. It needed to have a decent exchange rate that fluctuated on the open market. And then you needed to have a secure note, because when I left America, I got briefed on that same day that I left from the Secret Service. And the woman that gave me the briefing was fantastic. And she told me, she said, "General Tant, you go into the counterfeit capital of the world." So I said, wow. She said, you know, it's just a very high rate of counterfeit over there. And so here is a book, and she gave me this big thick book, and it showed the currencies under black light on what it looked like if it was good currency, ultraviolet light, excuse me, and also what it looked like if it was counterfeit. And so it had page after page of examples. And so we had this book mass produced and given to all of our bank managers that we use throughout the currency exchange. And it proved itself to be invaluable. And we also wanted to have convenient currency. And so we had 6 denominations made versus just the 2. And that made it a lot more easy for the people to use. And also the currency was meaningful. And I say that because the Iraqi people have some tremendous opportunities to place characters or photos on pictures of important places like the University of Iraq, and I'll show you some of these here in just a second. But these characters are absolutely very famous in the world history and Iraqi history, and the people could be proud of it, that their characters were on the currency. And that's what happened, because we met with the Central Bank of Iraq and the Kurds in their banking system, and they came up with a solution on what should be on each note, and that's what we had made for them, and it worked out perfectly. See if I could change the thing here. This little girl here says it all. So during the exchange, her expression was captured, and we all fell in love with her. And because we just felt like it was all worth it. And so the 25 million people over there living 3 decades under the oppression of Saddam Hussein, there was new hope. And she reflected that, and that was what she told us in her expression. All right, I mentioned the important characters, like here's a grain silo, and then the date palms. Well, you know, oil is their #1 economical power in Iraq, and but date palms is their 2nd biggest export. And it doesn't come to anywhere near the value of oil, of course, but it's still significant. And then here is an astrolabe, and it's one of the earliest scientific instruments and for astronomers. And here's a minaret in Samarra. Now remember the name Samarra, that town Samarra. I'm going to talk about that later. All right, let's go look at another one. So this is the 1,000 dinar note, and that has an ancient coin on it, a dinar. Dinar, of course, comes from Greek and Latin, which means money, currency. And so several other countries over there, Jordan and some others, they use the word dinar for their currency. And also here's an ancient university in Baghdad, 13th century. And over here we have a 800-meter waterfall. And then you have an old fortress that's out in the desert that dates to the 2nd century. Amazing. But these things are well known to the Iraqi people. And here's a 10,000 dinar. Now, the short name for him given by European geniuses of the Middle Ages was Al-Hazan. His name is something like Abu Ali Hassan ibn al-Hatham, but he's known as Al-Hazan. And he was a brilliant man, and he wrote over 200 books, and he wrote 7 volumes on how the eye functions alone. Like light is reflected off of an object back into our eye, and we see. That's a simple thing. But he knows all the details, and he wrote about that. And he also created analytical geometry, and where geometry and algebra come together for analytical geometry. All right, so, and then the 25,000 dinar note, we have Hammurabi. And Hammurabi is credited with writing the first code of laws. So, I mean, these are characters and individuals that are so meaningful to the Iraqi people. They love their new currency. Oops, let's see. So here is Ambassador Bremer, who I reported to directly. And he's quoted, "We are laying the groundwork for a free economy to blossom." And that said a lot more than just the words there, because it affected every one of the individuals over in Iraq, this new currency exchange. And so our mission was to basically receive the currency, organize it, secure it, and then manage it throughout the process of getting the money to the banks. And we used about 243 banks over in Iraq. They had secure vaults and met all the qualifications with branch managers and good employees. And then we had to take the old currency out of circulation and have it accounted for and destroyed. Now, this is basically what our ICE team structure was. All right, here were my leaders right here in this like gold coin, our command and control. And there's the Central Bank of Iraq. Now, the people of Iraq owned all of the money, naturally, that we had exchanged. And so Central Bank of Iraq was a key player in this. We did not want to ever put an American face on this operation. We always put an Iraqi face on this operation. We just secured it, provided all of the logistics for getting the money under fire to the banks and pull the old money back. And so we had some contractors to help us. So the company that created the currency was De La Rue, a British company that was nearly 150 years old, nearly 200 years old at the time, that had already produced 150 countries worth of national currencies. And so they were experts. They were experts in anti-counterfeit, and they knew how to produce these currencies. Now, these currencies, these 6 denominations, were all different sizes. Like the 25,000 dinar note was the largest in size and value, And then the 50 dinar note was the smallest. And so that's something I think we ought to consider it with our own American currency. But nevertheless, that's the way they did it. And that, to me, makes a lot of sense. But they also use very high quality paper, just like we do in the U.S. And they have watermarks, they have raised lettering. If you couldn't see, you could run your finger across the Iraqi currency note and you would be able to tell what size note it was, what value of it is, and that's important. It also has metallic threads through it, and different things in Taligo, and it has numbering system. Like on our currency, for example, we have two numbers on the face of our currency, and they're both the same. This long number on the left and one on the right, but they had three different numbers, and they were bound and determined to fight against counterfeiting. And I don't know if I just mentioned, but the high quality of paper they used, it cost about 6 cents a note. So that's very high quality considering the billions of notes that we had produced. The overall cost of the whole operation, I mean, with airplanes and everything, was a little over $200 million. And so, and that was paid for, basically out of the Iraqi funds. And so we had Hanover Aviation. We used them. That was also a British company, and they got Ilyushin 76s for us. Those were Russian aircraft, military former. But anyway, I mentioned Hanover Aviation. It was a British company, and they got us some Russian aircraft, former Russian aircraft, like our equivalent of our C-141 and our C-130. So I had two each of those that we flew the currency around inside of Iraq, and so I could replenish my hubs, and I'll tell you about them in a minute. And then I had Bearing Point, some employees there, and they helped with the project management, and then global risk strategies. They had my 700 former soldiers, and a lot of those soldiers were Fijians, but we had Canadians, we had South Africans, we had some from Australia, we had some from former Rhodesia, we had Americans, and British. And the full colonel retired who I had over this operation, he was British. And my deputy, by the way, he was from Scotland. So I had a hard time understanding him sometimes, but he was fantastic, John Rooney. And then we had a company, Custer Battles, that provided life support, and that was like trailers and the food and the latrines, toilets, and that's what they did. And then the military backup, that was our 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, 4th Infantry Division, and a multiple MDR, MRD. It was a multiple division, which was basically a British division commanded by a British Major General down in Basra. And so, let me go to the next one here. All right, just real quick. Okay, here I was head, and you see this right here, Kay Triggs? That was Karen Triggs. Now, she was the only woman on our team. But don't worry about that, because she was smarter than about 10 to 15 guys and had a worth ethic greater than 10 to 15 guys, okay? So she was over all of our information ops. All right, so I'm gonna hold something up here.
Okay.
So here, this is an example of what Karen Triggs had throughout the country. And then there were handbills, smaller versions of this, all explaining in the Farsi, Iraqi language that there was going to be plenty of money. So during the exchange period, you didn't all have to go on the first day to the banks and swap out your cash. It was going to be done over a 90-day period. And just to go with your friends calmly and get your money swapped out. Like with any operation, you want to have your plan done. And so we established our phased approach into 4 phases. And this got us carefully in our, we could see it in our own minds and watch it happen as we went along. And so we talked it out, we had it on paper, and we knew what we were doing. Okay, so when you look at Iraq, you are seeing a country that is just a little bit larger than California landmass-wise. But up here in the north, you see Mosul, and then Baghdad, and then Basra. So we basically drew 3 circles around these major cities, and all the banks and towns that fell within those circles became the responsibility of those 3 hubs. And so the main hub, of course, is Baghdad, and I had 300 soldiers there, and I had 200 up in Mosul, and I had 200 down in Basra. And so from there, we conducted our convoys. But first, we were having the plan, we had the plan for 27 747 loads of Iraqi dinar to be delivered to us. First, De La Rue had that currency made in 6 nations. And from there, it was flown to Manston, England, and then staged out of Manston, England to Baghdad, to the Baghdad International Airport. There it was offloaded. You'll see some pictures on that in a few minutes. It was offloaded and secured into a big facility, and we had that guarded by our people and by members of the Central Bank of Iraq. I had them sleep with the money and to be there at all times, and to have a person go on every convoy so that they could negotiate the signing of the papers. You're receiving X number of new dinar, and you're giving me back X number of old dinar. So it all balances out in the end, hopefully. And it did. But we also conducted from these 3 sites a total of 1,000 armed convoys. And an armed convoy consisted mainly of 35 of those former soldiers, well armed with M16s and machine guns, M60 machine guns mounted. And it was basically 6 to 8 vehicles on each convoy that went from the hub to the banks, and then offloaded the new currency and backloaded the former currency. We used 6.38 trillion dinar for the entire Iraqi currency exchange. That had a U.S. value at that time of about 3.2 billion U.S. dollars. There was 2,300 tons of new currency in nice wooden boxes and beautiful currency, as you've seen. And there were 2.25 billion banknotes altogether. And the old currency was much more than we anticipated. We thought it was going to be about 3,500, 3,500 tons, but it ended up being 13,000 tons. That's a lot, and you'll see some of that in a little bit. Also, when we designated those 243 banks, we had to provide them with counting machines and the ultraviolet lights for the checking the counterfeit currency, and the generators, and 150 satellite phones, Thuraya phones. And we had handheld radios for the Iraqi police. We had 4 to 20 police or trained people as guards from the Iraqi population guarding those banks every day, 24/7. And we also had to issue them a total of 750 AK-47s with ammunition. And that worked out really well. So we've talked about these already. There was a lot of fraud and abuse, and there'd been a lot of robberies right after the takeover, and the Iraqi bad guys tried to rob the banks, and sometimes they're very successful. So it was an extremely aggressive project in that it takes 2 to 3 years to change out a national currency during peace. And our guys changed it out in under 6 months. I mean, from start to finish. And so that was amazing in itself. So we used to joke about it in a way. We said, shoot at people and they work faster. And definitely they did get shot at. And we'll talk about that. Hopefully I've got a slide. Yeah. So you had the threat of terrorism constantly, and the former regime loyalists attacking the convoys or attacking any operation over there. It went to about 35 attacks a day, not against us altogether, but anywhere throughout Iraq. They were reported. When I first got over there in September, it was like 15 a day, and then it quickly escalated to about 35 a day. On our convoys, we had 15 ambushes, and our soldiers were trained to counter that, and they knew how to do it. You did not want to be on the receiving end of their abilities and marksmanship and expert shooting if you attacked them. And also we had, when it really got rough, we had the backups of quick reaction forces from the 82nd, 101st, or the 4th ID, or that MRD, that multiple force that the British commanded. There was always a bank robbery threat, and that's why we had those security people. Okay, in with the new. All right, here's a description. I told you about the 27 747 loads that came in from Manston to Baghdad International Airport. That was 90 tons of new currency, and that was what we called a central hub. Baghdad was a central hub, and the southern hub was Basra, and the northern hub was Mosul. So those Russian airplanes that were contracted to us by Hanover Aviation, they flew it up and then flew the old currency back. And then we had trucks to take it to the storehouses and also to the Central Bank of Iraq, ultimately, to be verified at the end of the mission. Oh, and we also took new currency to the central bank. They had to have a lot of currency on hand as well. So now we get into the photos, which are fun, and see, you can see the aircraft landing and being loaded or offloaded with forklifts. And here is Tom Simpson from the U.S. Treasury And myself, I wore a coat and tie 3 times over there, and I said, well, I'm going to wear it on this day because I got to meet the deputy of the Central Bank of Iraq, Al-Jabouri was his name, Mr. Al-Jabouri, and he was wonderful. And here's a big forklift in the back with currency. And there's another thing. You can see the flatbeds. And here's a truck loaded up with new currency in those nice boxes. Weighed about 90 to 100 pounds each crate. Here's some more loading. There's more with the new currency on board, getting ready to be taken to a secure site. Now, here is the Deputy Governor, Al-Jabouri, again. He had an open press conference. I mean, the TVs, newspaper people, journalists. I was standing right just next to him practically during this. I didn't understand a word that was being said, but I could understand what he was describing for sure. So we had these posters and all made of the new currency. That was, again, Karen Triggs. I told you about Karen Triggs, head of our information operation. She was amazing. And she worked close with the Central Bank of Iraq and all the journalists and helped us out more than I could ever imagine. Here we are on a convoy taking the money. Here's a machine gunner there and other troops, and there's a truck, and the currency is flat behind there. You'll see that in a second. Here's a machine gunner there, ready to go. Don't mess with them. Here's another. All right. Now, I told you to remember Samara. I asked you to remember Samara. Samara, we had a big delivery. We had 2 banks to deliver to, so millions of dollars worth of dinar, Iraqi dinar. And we'd been ambushed near Samara 4 times previously. So I called up General Ray Odierno, and I said, General, I said, we are going to be in Samara very shortly. And I know we're going to get ambushed again. I just feel it. And he says, Hugh, I understand it. And he says, I'll back you up 100%. He more than backed me up 100%. He gave us 10 Abrams tanks, MA1A2 tanks, and the crews with them, 4 infantry fighting vehicles, and a TAC Apache helicopter. And he also gave us, he coordinated with the Air Force for an A-10 Warthog. Can you imagine? Well, can you really imagine anybody attacking us? Well, they wanted that money bad, evidently, because they did. And so, right when our convoys hit Samara, all hell broke loose. And they were firing on us like crazy. And of course, the first guy shot was one of mine, and he got hit in the knee. He'd exited his vehicle, and he got hit in the knee, and he totally annihilated that guy that shot him. And we weren't in the body count business, but the soldiers have their duties, and 54 were counted of the enemy after a 45-minute gunfight. That's a long gun battle. And we had 6 wounded. 5 of our U.S. Army soldiers were wounded, and 1 of us was wounded. And but all throughout that terrible thing, our 2 convoys of 6 to 8 vehicles each with the troops. They delivered the currency and backhauled the old currency. They never missed a lick. These guys were so professional, it was unbelievable. And here's a bunch of rounds from a machine gun. And that was one of our British soldiers, if I recall. And here's a couple of our Fijian soldiers. They were all fantastic. Nobody could ever want for anything better unless they were all U.S. soldiers. But our U.S. soldiers were engaged, believe me. That's why we had this operation, to take some of the heat off of the U.S. forces. And that's why they wanted me, because I knew all the generals and knew the language, so to speak, and knew how to get things done with them. And it was great. So here is new currency again on a flatbed. And that's probably the northern site, if I recognize it, up in Mosul. And here we are actually moving out on a convoy. And here is, at the central hub, at the Baghdad International Airport, the big storage of the new currency. It's all lined up by denomination and controlled very tightly. Now, we did have an unsavory character every now and then. We had to have him checked out. You might recognize him. Here is on one of the Ilyushin 76s, former Russian jet, military jet, is now used for commercial purposes. And there it has some of the new currency on it that we were taking up to probably Mosul or Basra in the south. Now, this is in Baghdad because we had some armored cars, and that was the only place we had these type of armored cars. And there they are, offloading and accounting for every crate. Here they are with, this is what the old currency was stored in, these sacks like that, and every sack had the name of the bank manager, and the employees who put the money in the sacks. So if anything came up with those during the verification at the Central Bank of Iraq, we would know who to go to. And if nothing did come up, you'd know to give credit to that bank for what it turned in. All right, here's the old currency. You can see the red dye in there. And here's some of the new currency in there, guarding out in the street in front of a bank. And there's old currency right there that will be loaded on. And so it's all in the process, all in the mission. All right, now this is interesting to see. Here are citizens bringing their sack loads of currency to be swapped out in the bank. This was an everyday occurrence for those 3 months. Here's some bankers carrying in the new currency. We developed a 3-teller process where the first teller would take the cash in, count it on the counting machine. Second teller would count it again, look for counterfeit. And the third teller would deface the currency with permanent red dye, only defacing 1/3 of the notes. And that way, the currency wouldn't come in the front door. There'd be an exchange for new currency. And then that old currency would go out the back door and come back in through the front door again, get swapped out again. I learned that from Vietnam after action reports on the swap out of military script. And that worked like a charm for us. I don't believe they defaced the Vietnamese thing. We just went a step further. And to prevent the problem, we had it defaced. Here are a lot of citizens lined up at a given bank, here with their currency. There's police and security around a bank. Oops. Huh. What happened there? Out with the old currency. All right, this is just kind of opposite of what you saw coming in, and now it's going out. So it was being brought back from the hubs, the 3 hubs, and placed in a temporary storage site. And then it was taken to the Central Bank of Iraq and verified for counterfeit before it was disposed of. And here's where it's disposed of. In incinerators. We had many, many, many incinerators to destroy that currency. And it took into the following summer to get it all done. I mean, it took months to get it all done, that 13,000 tons of currency. All right, here is the old currency being loaded on the trucks to be hauled back to the hub. All right, here's the dying, a closer picture of the dying of 1/3 of the notes. Very messy job. We provided aprons, and the only aprons we could find over there were Mickey Mouse aprons. And so we bought up the market of Mickey Mouse aprons, and everybody got them in the 240 something banks we used. We had to have a little humor during all of this. All right, this is the verification at the Central Bank of Iraq. And there were 650 women who actually performed this. They were the main players in keeping track of any counterfeit. There was some storage that we had to use for this old currency, and you can see the massive amounts of this. If you put every note end on end, I had a mathematician, by the way, on the team, and I asked him to figure out something, and he figured this out. He said, if you put every note end on end, it would go around the equator 32 times. That's a massive amount of currency. All right. Now, after it was verified by the women at the Central Bank of Iraq, then it was okay to take it to the incinerators. And what happened is that on day one, it would be lit on fire, and it would stay on fire, and then it would basically roast. And on the third day, it was nothing but ash. That had to be the filthiest job in Iraq to clean out those incinerators. Just unbelievable. Here they are roasting, just checking them. And it's starting to turn into ash. We tried to do another option, and that was dig big trenches with water in them and put this cheap Saddam paper currency that was basically worthless after the exchange into water. But that got to be so messy, and might have had some politics involved in that. They wanted to burn it. And so we ended up burning it. It was just a temporary test, and then we burned it. Well, along the way, there was some good news. We met some wonderful children and people. So most of those people in Iraq are really, really good people. There's only about 5% of them that don't understand anything but maybe a bullet in the head. Here's a lot of teamwork that works amongst the bankers and in our team. Here's some of the soldiers providing security. Other people were on the team happy. It was starting to come to a close. Here's one of the bankers there, posing with the good soldiers. Here the soldiers were well armed, as you can see. They were ready for action, and they got it. Here's Colonel Wilkinson, the British officer who was basically over the security and logistics. Did a fantastic job. Every day started with prayer. Personally, I wish we had more of that in our country. Again, here are all the units, multiple national division. That's what I kept stumbling over. That was the British division. There's another one. No, that was it down in the southeast. And then they were covering our backs all the time. There's that Apache on the 30th of November in Samara when we got ambushed. Can you imagine trying to attack with that coming down your throat? There's some of the soldiers that helped us out, had our backs. Here's my team in Saddam's palace. There's a British officer again. There's me. There's the Scotsman there, John Rooney. There's Karen Triggs. There's Mr. Bloom. And I had a lieutenant colonel and a major who provided the liaison there with the headquarters of the military. And there we are sitting in the office. We've got all kinds of maps, and we had meetings every day, as you can imagine, 7 days a week. Here we are, good job done. Everybody's happy. On the 13th of December. Yeah. All right, so Saddam got caught, and there he's being defaced and all throughout Iraq. There he is in jail. This mission was a great mission. It was teamwork that works and delivery under fire. And I had a coin made to give every one of our soldiers. It has a date palm tree on the front. 2003, 2004, Iraqi Currency Exchange, teamwork that works, and delivery under fire, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Coalition Provisional Authority. A touchstone so they could have something where they could look at it and they knew they were part of a great effort to help the Iraqi people, and they did a fantastic job. There's me and my boss the day after the exchange was over, and we're both happy campers, as you can tell. That's Ambassador Bremer. He was a great leader. Our motto was teamwork that works. His motto could be leadership that works. Well, that's about it. All I have to tell you. And I want to thank my wife who's doing all this camera work with me. Thank you, honey. Love you. Bye. Good night.